Become. No one, not two. In sky and seed sown, dream of shadows to love through and hold their calloused hands. Shape change in the nether pool from breath to breath. As your mind is freed, your ass will follow. Then arise anew again and again. How do you look? How's that feel? Welcome to A Mutant Manifesto, episode... what is it, 12? We are joined by DM, lore master, lore keeper extraordinaire, Tyler. Tyler, how's it going?
I'm doing great. What's up?
Tyler and I used to work at a chicken shop, and during breaks, they would regale me with Warhammer 40k lore. And I was really impressed by their expansive just depth of knowledge about all things Warhammer 40k. And also, I had the privilege of spending a couple episodes in a DM that they led, in a role-playing campaign that they led, which was really incredible as well. So, just I thought it would be great to have Tyler on to explore the world of Warhammer 40k, which I think is something that I've alluded to a little bit in the past of this podcast. But when you think about mutants and you think about these ideas about, the potential, the sort of radical potential that mutation poses symbolically, contrasted with the sort of pseudo-fascism of a certain type of humanity, the Warhammer universe is a perfect place to look for this. It's a expansive world with fascism of every kind manifested. So in that space, it kind of frees us to think about what are some awful outcomes that we could actually accommodate. And it also helps us look within ourselves to be okay, what are some of our desires that actually we can see manifested in this world when we're freed of the burden of being a good or whatever. But yeah, to start things off, Tyler, I kind of wanted to ask you, if you could, in a few sentences, describe what the Warhammer 40k universe is to people. What is it? And also, what drew you to it, and how'd you get started getting involved with Warhammer 40k?
So, 40k is the company that originally made it is called Games Workshop out of England. And they, as a successor to their first game, which was mostly fantasy, decided to go with a more futuristic setting, which was Warhammer 40k. And the first interaction I had with it was I was very young, maybe 8 or 9, and I was at the mall, and there was a Games Workshop store in the mall that actually had full table setups with full miniature armies set up. And I remember going school shopping or something, and one of the guys invited me to just come look at the minis, and even offered hey, if you have an hour and a half to 2 hours, which my parents were not waiting, we could play a game. And I always remembered that, not knowing what it was called or anything like that, but just my eyes going big when I saw these cool big miniature fantasy battles on a tabletop. And later on, I had friends who were into it and explained to me what it was, and then I just full dived right into it and into all the lore of now all 3 different settings that Games Workshop offers for the setting. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of lore.
Yeah, I feel like Warhammer. I mean, yeah. So it's a nominally it is a miniature wargaming system, and so you collect all these miniatures and you painstakingly assemble them and paint them yourself, and that takes a lot of investment. So you really have to get deep into building your army, like each little individual unit, each individual figure, you like putting care into constructing and creating. And then it really looks quite like breathtaking on the board too. Usually the terrain is also like painstakingly crafted, and it looks like something about it like really transports you, you know. Um, and then combined with that, like the amount of like compelling lore there is, like the amount of stories and the amount of different factions and different things that have happened canonically and non-canonically and everything is like almost kind of infectious. Like once you start learning about it, it's like so fun to keep digging, and then you like want to spread it to your friends, you know?
Yeah, it really has grown into something that is more owned by like the community at this point than I think Games at Workshop ever will. And even with like, not condoning cough cough, but the figures are so and paints are so expensive now. Like the community has come together like so well to like 3D print these like minis and make them like affordable once again to the demographic, which would usually be like kids with absolutely no money.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's cool. I really do. There are obviously, it's been around for a long time, so there are a lot of old conservatives in the community that put limits on things, but for the most part, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've been kind of enjoying just thinking about, there's, I think Hobgoblin is this game. It's like a miniature wargaming system where like the idea is that you're supposed to be able to customize it to basically make any kind of unit. And you can also use anything, as a miniature. But I really like the idea of like kit bashing and DIY and yeah, 3D printing stuff. In Magic the Gathering, I really like the use of proxies, and just being creative with these properties. It is fun. Like I really respect like a lot of the world building that they've done, like as a company too. But like using that as a jumping off point is like what it's always meant to be. I feel like when it comes to imaginative gaming systems.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, how it's evolved has been really interesting, especially into like the newer days because even though we supposedly started like year 40,000, thus like 40K, if we're talking about like recent releases and lore and we're talking, God, I think we're on ninth or 10th edition of Warhammer 40K. And in lore, we are 41K. So a whole century has passed canonly in the lore from the beginning. And even then, the lore preceding it, which was 30K, the Horus Heresy, which will get us right into like how chaos invaded the Imperium. So a lore of 11,000 years with like the base of what they've started, a universe they've created.
It gives you so much to play with. So, in this particular episode, I wanted to delve really deeply into the lore of one of the four chaos gods of the Warhammer universe, Nurgle specifically. So, we're going to be getting into this lord of disease. It corresponds to a lot of themes we've brought up in the podcast before, but again, kind of takes it to this like gamified, dramatic, nerdy height that makes it kind of fun to play with these very serious and kind of horrible circumstances. But I did want to kind of ask, like Josh, what was it like poking around for in the Warhammer universe as somebody who's newer to it?
It's really cool. I, for context, Warhammer keeps coming up, I think, just being like a fantasy sci-fi lover myself. So on like YouTube, I'll see just random videos and references to Warhammer. So when I was looking through it, and I got some of the Nurgle lore, but then the Imperium came up, and I was like, all right, this is actually like, whoa, this is so scary. And I had just finished Parable of the Sower, so I was like, oh God, like I'm seeing journeys in that direction. So it's really, really cool. And it's also surprisingly like detailed. Like there's every, I don't know.
Yeah.
I was falling in love with the fact that like everything is just kind of like a well-oiled machine. So when you're talking about the fandom being like expanding that universe, that it was really exciting to hear. I was like, oh, I'm actually kind of curious what the storylines are now.
Well, I think this kind of brings us. So yeah, the Parable of the Sower being Octavia Butler's like unfinished trilogy. Well, the first of her unfinished trilogy about a girl who develops a religion around the idea that we need to go interstellar. Basically, this idea that like we are the God is change, and the point of life is to spread it to more planets, to continue to let it unfold in in the cosmos essentially, and so yeah, I think that there's like this kind of like this impulse that's been manifested by like SpaceX and stuff as well to like, well, we need to go colonize, we need to go interstellar, like we need, like there's a limited window in which we can become an interstellar species, and we like must do that. And that kind of like carpe diem sort of approach to like exploring space can also kind of be found. It can also be kind of found in like sort of a manifest destiny kind of thing, where it's like, okay, like we need to go spread our seeds throughout the world. And I don't think that that's necessarily what Octavia Butler was dreaming up there, but it definitely is one of the ways that we can see the colonial projects of finding the new world just continued in the imagination of people today. And I think that that is very thoroughly explored in the realm of the Imperium, in the realm of the Grimdark, as they call the Warhammer 40k world. It's the same kind of fascistic approach that like Starship Troopers explores as well. It's like, okay, we need to keep finding new enemies and keep finding new horizons, otherwise this enterprise is going to crumble. And so I think this leads us really well into the question that I had for Tyler. If you could maybe unspool a little bit, like what is the Imperium, and how does the Horus Heresy kind of give rise to this understanding of what chaos is?
Right. So, okay, where to start?
And yeah, I apologize for making you reduce this like gigantic period of 11,000 years into like
Yeah,
a few
yeah.
sentences.
No, that's the best part of just info dumping and ranting about this is like you said, it's so intricate in the details that you can completely derail yourself getting into things. So I want to make sure like basic understanding gets there before I do exactly that and just ramble. But so humanity existed, and initially, well, talking like in terms of when the chaos gods were created, Nurgle was the very first one, very shortly followed by Khorne, Tzeentch, and then later on, because they are the youngest, would be Slaanesh, being the four major chaos gods that exist in canon lore. Nurgle being the god of disease, decay, rot, and rebirth. The rebirth from rot and decay is a major theme of like everything that he's about. And he was the first one to exist, basically the cycle of life being the first major factor, I suppose, in like living creatures and humans. Next is Khorne, god of war and conquest, blood and skulls. Just war and violence to its peak. Tzeentch is the god of magic and fate and mysteries, which is just a weird one to get into. And then Slaanesh, who was created later by essentially the 40k's version of elves, was created, and they are the god of excess and lust, and basically just about all sorts of pleasures and experiences just pushed to their most excessive state. But the Imperium started like, we start on Terra, essentially exactly Earth, and humanity existed as we know it, where we are currently, up to, I believe, coming towards like a 20,000 year mark of some sort, where humanity officially just in a state of just warring amongst itself was just going to snuff itself out. And this human that we only know as the emperor of mankind, who was not at this time, existed and somehow knew of the kind of trajectory humanity was heading, and essentially wanted to pave the path towards a perfect humanity as this like superhuman, borderline like symbolic of like Jesus, just this weird human that's just like godlike for no reason. And through the power of quote unquote science, he created 12 sons, which were the Primarchs. And Chaos, knowing that this being was a threat to them, that he could perfect humanity to a point where they would no longer have to worry about these main faults that was keeping humanity in check, decided to invade his laboratory and spread the Primarchs, these 12 beings of perfection, across the galaxies. The Emperor of Mankind united humanity under the cause of exterminating alien races instead of each other, focusing on colonizing planets and destroying violent Xenos creatures, and also as a secret bout to collect his 12 sons. So, leading into 30k, the empire of man has spread like a virus, just conquering galaxies upon galaxies. He's reclaimed 10 of his 12 sons. 2 of them have been redacted from history. We have no idea what happened to 2 of them. They are just completely redacted from imperial record. That's all we know. But his 12 sons existed and began conquering the universes, and some were more special than others, and each one was granted a legion of 10,000 soldiers, each of them originally humans, but were injected with the perfect genetic seed of these demigods, and those created the first Space Marines. An event happened where the Emperor finally thought that his sons would be capable of finishing the job of conquering the universe, and he receded into hiding to essentially set the last difficulty that humanity had against the Chaos Gods, which was space travel over massive light years of space. Because at the time, the only way essentially for humanity to travel that deeply through space was to literally throw their ship through the realm of the Chaos Gods, known as the Warp. And the Chaos Gods, again, in a last-ditch effort to avoid humanity truly just conquering everything, they infected one of the sons, and a few of the sons, to slowly turn half of his sons against him. And this was the great event known as the Horus Heresy, where on the Imperial side, 2 of the Loyalist Primarchs died, as well as 2 of the Chaos Primarchs. And a massive war broke out, those loyal to Chaos and those loyal to the Imperium, all of it crescendoing to the Empire of Man being gravely wounded and the Chaos Space Marine legions going into hiding. And that leads us into 40k, where the Imperium of Man has essentially crumbled because they no longer have any of the demigods or gods to lead them. And one of the founding things that the emperor had was don't believe in religion. It was like imperative that no one get religion. But one of his sons, who was Chaos, actually created a Bible essentially on the Empire of Man. So 10,000 years of degradation where the one man couldn't lead his people, they have essentially completely turned essentially a utopia that he had built of perfect humanity into this fascist, oligarchical, religious state that is now the Imperium, where these demigod soldiers are left, but with these instructions of just conquering in the name of the Emperor, who is just a corpse being kept alive on a throne. And on the other side, the Chaos Space Marines have just degraded, being 10,000 years to essentially exposed to what's the worst of humanity, becoming its most excessive forms, I suppose. But yeah, that's the base of where it leaves you.
Yeah, so basically we start with like one big unified humanity, like under one big imperium. And then basically, yeah, the Chaos Gods begin slowly, like gradually corrupting half of it. And then basically now we have Chaos humanity and then like non-Chaos humanity in all these different sub-factions that are splintered out. And there's no longer that one unity, but there is kind of like a vague battle line between like Chaos and Order.
Yeah.
So they're colonizing all of these planets,
Right.
and that causes the Chaos Gods to be like, "Oh, we got to fuck this up." Like they're the Imperium, and this is prior to the Imperium being the Imperium, right?
No, it was still considered the Imperium. It's more that it falls into a state because, like I said, this emperor is like groomed up as like essentially this Jesus figure god, and basically through the corruption of history by the church that was in an ironic state put there by chaos. Like it's hard to explain like how it all like degraded without getting like the specifics of the war, and specifically one of the chaos primarchs called Lorgar, who was just this zealous human who was raised on a zealous world that was all about like excessive religion, flagellation to an extent, like very radical religious. And even though he was explained to time and time again by his father, it's like, I am not a god. I am your father. I am not a god. There's no religion in the Imperium if we want to be perfect. And Lorgar rebelled out by essentially making a Bible about his father to spite his father. And at some point in the Imperium, because of all the expunged records, the Bible was put into place and corrupted humanity into, instead of being, that was a man who led us, it's, oh, let's put our faith in a god. The Emperor will save us. The Emperor will lead us, even though he was just a mortal, a scientist, in fact, who was like, no, I paved the way. I've finally figured out how to perfect humanity.
I see. So the religion actually created the rift in this perfect humanity scenario.
it's one of the key things that ended up corrupting a lot of it. And also, without the Emperor, all these Xenos factions they were picking on, as well as now Chaos itself in full force, has gained an entire legion of demigods and demigod soldiers that were once fighting for the Imperium are now conquering the same worlds that the Imperium once had. And it just crumbles everything in a state of panic.
I wonder if like you wanted to speculate or if you knew like what do you think about like the origins of the chaos gods? Like where do they come from? And like what is the initial temptation from like Lorgar to start like accepting their influence?
So the chaos gods, in a sense, it kind of goes off of like the fantasy idea of a god, where if there's enough of something or enough of a belief in something, that's what will grant this godlike being form and power. So, how I've heard it explained by a bunch of people within the community theorizing is the four main chaos gods are kind of the things that, at least in the lore maker's mind, were the four things holding humanity back from progression in a positive way. Was the cycle of life, decay, and death and rot being Nurgle, Khorne, violence and war, infighting, Slanesh, just excessive use of things instead of being precise, and Zinch, just being unable to control things, being a slave to fate, whatever that be, are the four things holding us back as a like society. And what really drove Lorgar to kind of follow them was more that when he was punished by his father for making the Bible and releasing it, essentially, his father, in reprimand, decided to send one of his more loyal sons to essentially commit a mass genocide on Lorgar's home planet to basically expunge any sort of religious ideology and basically teach Lorgar it's like, this is the price if we're going to continue this. And Lorgar wanted to believe in something, and the Chaos Guides finally had a chance to whisper in one of the Primarch's ears. So he was able to kind of jump into it right away because they were already completely cool with being I am a god. And that's the thing to believe in more than anything, was they gave him something to believe in when he needed it.
Right, because they were like, "Oh, you want to believe in something? Like we are literally like we can manifest powers. Like we have these like we are like gods. So you can believe in us."
Yep. Yeah.
So I do think it's really interesting. I think that kind of this whole battle between like chaos and order is really like kind of also a battle is really like kind of a battle between like control and like accepting that you don't have control. Those are the kind of the existentially, those are kind of the two sides. Like struggling for control, or I mean, I guess yeah, but it really kind of is this conundrum because you see. I think that the Primarch, what's his name, like the Emperor, like if I understand it correctly, I think that he had some knowledge of the Chaos Gods, but part of his initial strategy was to keep that knowledge, was to attempt to keep that knowledge from all of his, like everyone, including all of the other, his like children and everyone, all of humanity. So part of his strategy was that like these things are evil, and the more that people know about them, the more that they will have power. But even in trying to control, and that's part of why he was trying to say like, oh, there should be no religion, blah blah blah. But then even in trying to stamp that down, well, that just creates more resentment, which in turn feeds someone's desire to explore this thing. So it's kind of this existential struggle where it's like, how do you fight against something without telling people what it is, but how do you tell people what it is without them being allured by it somehow?
Yeah, especially when it occurs naturally in everyone,
Right, and that's the
all
other
four of
thing.
those things.
This idea of like maybe these are like a certain number of sins or whatever, but like, how can you wage a war against sin? You know, like it's really hard to do if it's something that's baked into humanity.
The Chaos Gods are the main gods of the Warhammer universe, or are there other gods as well?
So there are other gods who were created in similar ways. For example, going back to what I said about Slanesh, she was created by, or they, all three pronouns, um, but he was created because the elves, being immortal, had even more time to take things to excessive levels. And that's how they created that. But as because of that same thing, being able to live infinitely until finding a state of enlightenment, the elves were able to find a way to also transcend to a type of godhood. So there are the elven gods, but they don't exist in the same, I guess, realm that the chaos gods do. The chaos gods, like I said, they exist in this warp, this nothingness. Um, Whereas the elven gods seem to still exist, manifest almost like the Olympian gods, where they are literally just a reflection of their people because they were their people at one point, and they have like a divine place they are, like a heaven. But through the lore of Slanesh, that heaven's been cut off to them. So,
Yeah, and like
yeah.
as there are like other gods to some
And the
extent.
orcs also have gods, yeah.
Yeah, right. But it's like it seems like it's mostly kind of like a belief based system of like godhood and divinity,
Yeah,
like to
that's
an
a major
extent.
theme of any of them.
And I feel like also one thing about the Chaos Gods, which are the most like, Warhammer is all about, it's kind of like the entire universe of it is by definition about, combat, conflict, like this constant struggle. So, like, what would the gods be of that world? What would be the most, if that's the realm you're in, like, which gods would be most interested in that? And also, another thing to note is that I think that part of the way that the warp starts out all placid and peaceful and completely tranquil, but then people dip into it for this sort of style of like super quick travel, and they start messing with it. And then also there are psychers in this universe, which are basically like psychic mages, and when they use their powers, they're also tapping into the warp and like stirring it up. And as I understand it, those acts of like interacting with, fiddling with the warp are part of what gives rise to the Chaos Gods as well.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the Psychers as like a whole phenomenon is like especially within the 40k Imperium where there's all this zealous and everything is taken over. Being a Psyker, being able to tap into that is considered a crime. And in the Imperium, you have two options when they find out you're a Psyker. They either exterminate you on the spot, or you will be taken from your home and designated a Imperium state designated psyker, where you are allowed to practice these magics under strict surveillance, and the minute they sense even a ounce of chaos is getting to you, you are exterminated on the spot. Just completely watched the entire time. Or even worse fate of a psyker is you become I'm forgetting the name of them now, but essentially for like I said, they have to travel through the warp for interstellar travel. Some of these psychers as punishment are literally turned into human GPSs, tethered into the ships by only kept alive via the ship, and through an incredibly painful process, they are turned into ways to travel the warp.
That fucking sucks.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention, like, this kind of, it continues to pull at these kind of, like, paradoxical allegiances, I feel, like the Warhammer lore. Because, you know, you might, you know, there's parts of, like, you definitely don't want to be, like, because, like, the chaos is always depicted as, like, extremely cruel in various ways. They're, like, horrible things to happen to you. But there's always, but then, like, contrasted with that, it's like, in trying to defend against it, it seems that equally horrible things tend to crop up, you know? So it's like, you know, yeah, it's kind of like this thing where, like, once you're in conflict with something, you're going to get corrupted one way or another, whether it's by that or by your attempt to not be that. It's kind of this, yeah, that's something I kind of enjoy, because that kind of forces you to be like, okay, well then what do you want to do? You know, like, if it's all going to be fucked either way, like, what are you drawn to, you know? And that kind of brings me to the question, Tyler, like, of all the different factions that you could have started collecting, of all the different factions, there's like so many that we haven't even touched on at all. There's like millions of different, I mean, you know, there's like so many different sub-factions and factions to draw from. Like, what started, why did you gravitate towards Nurgle? Because Nurgle is kind of your fave here, right? And that was the first units you started collecting, correct?
Yeah, so I specifically started collecting Death Guard, which Death Guard is amongst the traitor legions, the ones who fell to chaos of the Primarchs and whatnot. Each god decided to pick a favorite Primarch. So there's four factions that are sub factions but have their own books in terms of lore, that are Space Marine Legions or Space Chaos Marine Legions that focus on one god, and the Death Guard are Nurgle specifically. And the draw to them more than anything is I've always had like a fascination, like thematically and like in terms of gameplay mechanically, of like poison and decay and things of that nature, and also the art for them more than anything really sparked a love for me in them. One of the things that is a key to all Nurgle units that show their faces is they always have big, dumb, stupid smiles, because followers of Nurgle are ecstatic. Out of, if you're gonna fall to any of the four Chaos Gods, if you're really ready for it, I'd say Slanesh is a good one to fall under. But Nurgle, proven time and time again, all of the followers of Nurgle, all of the demons of Nurgle, everything, are so joyous and happy to be doing what they're doing, which is spreading plague and creating these zombie creatures and rotting people from the inside out. But just this smile and glee that they do it with just like kind of gave me this draw. I remember one of the first Nurgle units I ever saw was this. It's a single piece and it's called a Sloppity Bile Piper. And it is literally this Nurgle demon that is playing a bagpipe full of mucus that sprays onto people and infects them.
Oh man.
So just this chorus of Scottish, like, imagining these demons coming after you. You can see your skin poxing and mutating as they get closer, and you just hear bagpipes cut through the silence as this thing skips through the battlefield.
Yeah.
And I was hooked from then on. I just
Yeah.
the gleefulness of the horrible putrid things that they
Yeah.
do is really really fun.
There's something there's because like Games Workshop is British, and there's something like very British about the style of horror that they bring to things, and humor too. Like just the naming, the idea of like it being poxy and like dippity or whatever, and like I feel like there's kind of this dourness and sort of sardonic quality that infuses a lot of these more like kind of honestly a little bit humorous factions. And also like I do think that there's something really like truly compelling about like the like Nurgle really flips on its head what it means to be well, what it means to be okay. Like honestly, it truly like flips that on its head because it's horrifying to you. It's like absolutely terrible to be in battle against these like creatures that are like gallantly, like gleefully, like skipping along and spreading like pus and like blood, and like you see someone next to you like transmogrify into a like just like a disgusting ghoul until you accept him into your life, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're having a great time. It's just like you are spreading joy, you know? You're spreading like a wonderful existence. So I wonder if you would maybe, to get us kind of started with like understanding Nurgle more deeply, I wonder if you would actually maybe be willing to kind of like recount the tale of the first contact that those Marines had with him, and how that first ship got corrupted.
Yeah, so the Death Guard was led by the Primarch Mortarion. Mortarion was, when he was snatched away by Chaos as a little test tube baby, he landed on, oh, I can remember this. He ended on Barbarous, I believe the planet ended up being called. And Barbarous had naturally occurring volcanoes that just spouted poisonous, noxious gas into the atmosphere of Barbarous. So essentially, everyone lived in these bubble domes. Everyone wore respirators. It was so bad there. He, even as a demigod, grew lung problems and actually was attached to a respirator system that he wore throughout his entire time as a Primarch. And when he was discovered, he had a knack for siege warfare, long, drawn-out chemical siege warfare, because of how resistant he had become due to the atmosphere of Barbarous. And that's where the Death Guard specialized. Drawn-out, just attrition-style warfare was their specialty. And initially, Mortarion actually took a lot of convincing to turn against the Imperium. He, in fact, even though he was part of the Horus Heresy, was not actually worshipping the Chaos Gods during the 30K. He truly believed, through what his brother Horus, who was the leading faction, or like the leading cause of the heresy, he truly believed Horus's words that the Emperor was keeping something from humanity and was corrupting it, which in no way was Horus lying. And in the retreat, when the Chaos legions were stopped at the walls of Terra, he was sucked into the warp. What he didn't know was his first mate, or like the right under him, the commander of his legions, Typhus, was already completely under Nurgle's control. and he was playing this the whole time, set the ship on a course to basically wind up directly in Nurgle's palm, and the entire his tens of thousands of men, the entire legion, was infected with Nurgle's rot, which is this disease that slowly rots you from the inside out, leaves you completely alive. Your brain is completely aware of everything that's going on. Your stomach splits in half and begins to spout a mouth. You sprout bone horns from your skull. And his entire legion is just suffering. And that's when Nurgle finally slipped in and goes, I can bring you peace. I can bring your men peace. All I need is your loyalty. And from then on, the Death Guard were the Legion of Nurgle. And the most symbolic thing of that I always loved, and it's the way I painted my Chaos Marines actually, is the Death Guard. Their colors initially were completely like eggshell white armor with black trim. And because of the rot and the disgust, most of the Chaos Legions of Nurgle you see now are green. Just green from all of the bile and pus that's stained their armor. And yeah, that whole decay and everything is what I really love. There's the faction I specifically painted for, the Weeping Legion. Their whole thing is they preserve that gray armor as it kind of just, you can see it slowly as things leak out of the armor are starting to stain it, but you can still see the original gray Death Guard, and they even fight with the original strategies that they fought in 30K, and it's almost like these people is still consciousness of who they were even after they've been corrupted.
Yeah, yeah. There's something there about like a chaos demon. Like you have to like consent, but it's always coerced. I feel like you have to like accept them, but like there's like usually like coercive circumstances where you basically can't say no. It's either that or you have a horrible fate. Um, but yeah, it's like it starts with these like Nurgle can give you diseases, but then you don't accept him until like you. But then it feels awful to you until you accept him, right?
Yeah, so that's the kind of his second thing, and I think also one of the things I like most about him is the whole rebirth part of Nurgle. That's a big thing of like him, and like Nurgle himself is when we're talked about now is he has a garden, like this massive garden that expands out in front of his castle, where he's slowly, meticulously breeding these plants that create new plagues. Like the Black Plague was created by him from these plants. And he's very much about that. He considers himself a grandfather. His followers refer to him as a grandfather, and a lot of them believe that this rebirth process that he allows him, where you feel this glee, this joy, this perfection of life. You're no longer have to fear death because you've been through it. You're now just a rotting existence with a conscience, and I think that's the big appeal to like people who follow Nurgle, and why his people are so happy is each of the Chaos Gods, even though it's like it's a very dramatized version of like something holding back humanity. Each one has a positive value, which is exactly that. Nurgle brings death and rot and plague and like suffering, but he always brings something out of it. Happiness, even though it's disgusting to our view, happiness is birthed from all of this rot and decay that he's brought. He brings as just as much life as he takes.
That's crazy. Like, because when I think about the sort of hellscape of like everybody's at war, he seems to be the one that gets the most out of it, right? Like, if everybody is dying anyway, right? He's spreading. I don't. I hesitate to ask, what is he trying to do? Because it seems like what's being done already is just his playground. Like he's just enjoying the chaos of it, like the ride, right? Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, that's kind of his place of like with grandfather. He is the oldest of the four because I think, like I said, out of the four, he is probably the most unavoidable. Like there's no way you can escape him. Everyone has to meet him eventually in some capacity. So like as much as he like is pictured as this massive gargantuan like chunky creature with a big old smile, and he's a grandfather, and he's always on this cauldron stirring up his new plague to unleash on humanity. At the same time, for those who aren't following him, he is like this looming grim reaper that is you're going to go to him eventually, and you're going to be part of his garden eventually.
I think that like really that duality really like epitomizes like actually kind of what makes Warhammer so fun in the first place, because it's like it's this idea of like the worst possible thing you can think of, but then it actually is ultimately like, incredibly joyous and hopeful. Like it's like the worst thing you can possibly think of until you actually experience it, and then like boom, all of a sudden it's like a blast. And I think that's actually, you know, it doesn't have to be that way. It's not the only way to imagine these sorts of evil forces, but but it actually is ultimately kind of like weirdly hopeful. And there's also something I wanted to say about like the kind of non-teleology about like you know, so because I wanted to hit this point home a little bit, because I also wanted to point out the like in the lore, the human worlds. I wonder if you could maybe, Tyler, explain what like a hive world is, and if you could sort of like underline the what life is like for like an average person, like an average normal person, like not a space marine, but like an average person in the Imperium.
Yeah, so the hive worlds are essentially just in place to keep population. Um, it is essentially to breed workers, to throw into factories, and everything of the sort. But just essentially cramming as many people as possible into this tightest confined, monitored space to just, you know, maintain what we need to. Because at the same time, where are they getting new space marines? Where are you getting these? People who either have the option of the hive worlds, you can either end up working in these factories where you'll just slave away until you die, or worse, whatever's happening in these hive worlds that are essentially just not taken care of in the slightest. There's only the means for humanity to live and work, and that's it. And if you show you're different in any way, then you are a heretic. You are corrupted by chaos, and but don't worry, they won't waste you as a human. Your consciousness will still be used as a microcomputer, either put into what's called a servitor skull, which are these floating skulls that are basically walking iPhones that they've turned human beings into, or you become, I believe that. I believe they're also just called servitors. I want to make sure here, but essentially, they just use your corpse and the electrical signals from your brain to operate a robot, essentially. And that's your conscience. Your conscience is left in there screaming, with no escape, and you just constantly work until your body wears out and you go brain dead. And yeah, even then, like, you can see where that life, some people would just embrace any of those gods at that point just to have something. And it's exactly like the Imperium is breeding its own problems, which is a massive thing that the Imperium does. It loves doing that. So, but yeah, and even to that extent, like more things grow under that, the people in revolt have created what's called the underhive under some of these, where they will take to lives of essentially tribe-like gangs just to survive and not be found by the imperium, so they can live semi better.
I mean, it's life, and it's like the classic, like just it's like hyper capitalist, or like beyond capitalist, I suppose. Like it just is like a hyper authoritarian life under constant coerced labor. Yeah.
But like you describing this, I think I think I watched a YouTube video that was like the 10 like least desirable jobs in the Imperium, and when you mentioned the servers, like you're right. Like at a certain point, you're like, well, fuck this. I might as well like worship Nurgle and be happy. Like I might as well um fight against this. And do the tribes, like I guess in the Underhive, do they take on specific gods to as out of rebellion? Like how does that work?
So some of them are corrupted by chaos gods, but most of them are just like essentially like homeless people just trying to gather what they can from the factories above just to come down and survive at night. And the gangs aren't necessarily themed in any sort of the Nurgle things, but they are willing to like live these tribe-like lives just to avoid the horrors of the hive world above them. So they kind of take on that where it's like a whole nother game. um, but essentially, the factions in that are like the policing force of the Imperium, which is the Astra Custodes. No, no, no. Oh boy. They have a specific military faction that is just like a police force on these different hive worlds or factory worlds. And then these gangers essentially all fighting for resources underneath this world, just trying to avoid the police so they don't become servitor skulls or get drafted into the military or whatever other reason.
Yeah, I mean, side tangent. There's also, shout out Tyranid. There's also like gene stealer cults. There's like, there's common, which are like cults of dissatisfied citizens in these worlds that are like infected by these like alien hive-minded beings to basically become like psychic beacons. They spread the word of these like savior species that will then like lure them and then like psychically create strife in the homeworld to make the invasion more easy for these like hive-minded aliens. But really, the aliens are just trying to use them for genetic matter, but and for like biomatter, just eat them up because there's like an insectoid race. It's one of my favorites. But for me, this also kind of like it also kind of I'm thinking about Alien Romulus. Shout out, it's great. Have y'all seen it?
Oh, I want to see it.
It's so
bad.
good. But if you could live your entire life on this asteroid belt, like getting like some crazy horrible lung disease from like, and then that's all you can do for like the next 70 years that you have in the world, or turn into a xenomorph. Like, which one would you do? If you could do that, yeah. I just think that, and I think that reality becomes more and more familiar to people in the real world. I think that there's maybe a reason, that might be the reason why people turn to like extreme decisions, about their lives, and how to maybe do away with them or whatever in certain ways, and in many different potential outcomes of that. But I think that's that's radicalization. It's in whatever form it takes. It's like so scary until you actually are there, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, that's like my chance for something more meaningful or better, or whatever. Leaving all that aside for a second, I wanted to spend some time just talking about um, why it's so fun to play with disease specifically, and just like I feel like almost every game, whether it's like Apex Legends or like League of Legends or Dota, let alone Dota, World of Warcraft, like any kind of game you can think of, D&D, like whatever. Like it's so common for there to be like a poisoner type or like a type that deals in pathogens and and uh, and like disease, spreading some sort of infection, you know. And then I think about also there's these games like, Pandemic, where you actually play as a virus, or, maybe even our fascination with zombies to begin with. Like, why is it so fun to play with the idea of virality and passing on contagions and stuff? And like Josh, do you have any exposure to this? Because like for me, like when I was little playing these games, like I definitely gravitated towards those sorts of characters. Like it's a fun gameplay mechanic to like spread something that infects multiple other creatures, and it's something I enjoy playing with in those settings. I wonder, and Tyler does as well. I'm wondering if Josh, you know what I'm talking about, if you like feel that way at all.
100%. I mean, even in Pokemon, like Toxicroak was one of my favorite Pokemon, and I love the move Toxic. Like all the Pokemon can learn Toxic, so they all have this venom that just increasingly does damage. Also in Elden Ring, I think my first build, I like was making it more poison focused because it's really fun to just be like, all right, now that you're poisoned and I'm still learning your move, like you're losing health, and I get to just like run around and watch as decay spread through this entity. But yeah, it's interesting because I've always seen it as like an aggressive tool, right? Like if I can't, maybe I'm just dumb and I don't know how to like min max very well in these games, but it's often like, oh, if I can't destroy you by brute force, I'm going to sort of like bide my time until finally you succumb to illness. And maybe it's fun for me because it feels like I've learned, like I don't know, it's like I've learned a different strategy. It feels like I'm strategizing. Maybe that's what I mean to say, rather than um fighting outright, which I guess, I don't know, me personally, when I think about like, oh, would I win in any sort of fist fight? It's like probably not.
Mm-hmm.
But if I am smart enough and I can like, weasel my way out. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out why like poison as like a mechanic,
Mm-hmm.
and like fantasizing about a world where like I don't know, like to use the phrase like the meek will inherit the earth or something, like just
Mm-hmm.
spreading weakness so that we're all in the same position of like weakness. It's like an equalizer of sorts.
I think my biggest thing with it is I love the idea of just putting something out there and then just watching it go. Just watching it
Mm-hmm.
even lose control without you. It is kind of just a fun thing to do. But also like in more like competitive things, like say like Magic the Gathering, there's also kind of a fun thing of watching people squirm as you just kind of sit there going, I'm not doing anything, it's just
Yeah.
happening. Like there's kind of a fun there's a fun thing of like watching people squirm against something that's just slowly creeping forward that they can't stop.
Yeah, I think there's also something that with a lot of these games where it kind of changes the paradigm, the traditional paradigm. Like it's not normal damage, it's usually like something that accrues, and you can either be opportunistic and sneaky about like getting one shot in and then like hiding, or you can like do sort of these passive effects that like affect an area or like are traps, or or that like does this other kind of damage, that it's like people have to deal with this new whole paradigm kind of. It's not
Yeah.
just being punched in the face, it's not just being attacked with a sword, or like hit with a fireball. You have to. It's like a new. Usually, it represents like it's like a unique kind of play style that you can play with, But
Yeah.
but yeah, then there's also like, so then what about like imaginatively? Like, why do we enjoy the like the idea of I think that letting something watching something unfold is definitely there. Like I'm thinking about how fun it is to like I like those sort of like enclosed ecosystems that people make, like those aquariums where they put in like you know um, a scoop of sand from the ocean or whatever in like a certain environment and just like watch what happens and just like like different things will come up and colonize the space and then they'll die and then like new little critters will come up, little microorganisms of different kind. You'll think it'll all die, but then there will still be little tiny creatures there somehow. Just like watching that unfold, like that's I think part of what's so fascinating about life is just like seeing that it has this persistence and continues through these cycles that you can't really imagine. And I think that definitely is the case with infection too. Like, I think everyone's COVID, of course, must be mentioned here at some point. But like part of the thrill of it was being like, what's going to happen? Like, there's a new mutation. There's a new mutation. There's a new mutation. How is this going to affect my life? Like how is this going to affect the world? Like, and I think that infection being unpredictable like that is definitely there's something thrilling about it. Like and of course I'm not trying to belittle what it's like to actually experience like chronic illness or anything, but I think that it must be said that there's like this shadowy underbelly of the world that finds it fascinating, and that like viruses, the way that they affect and shape and like mutate life is like kind of interesting, kind of compelling.
That kind of sense that we can't see it until there is like and compared to not seeing it to the effects it can take, a lot of diseases in like I guess the way they're portrayed in like either fantasy RPG or like media is like zombies. You immediately begin to rot and become this creature, or in the terms of the Black Plague, like these massive black boils start appearing on you, and it's just like this effect that's just in the air or wherever it is just looming, and then it can just immediately, like you said, mass mutate your body and can distort you and take your life within an instant, and in such a like violent way compared to like say something that can be completely unseen your whole life that just takes you.
Yeah, and even on that point, right? Like it has these physical manifestations, but the fact that the virus itself is invisible is kind of fascinating, right? Like you only know once it's manifested inside of you, and that's I don't know, that's intriguing to me in some way. In that, like, I'm thinking about germs, I'm thinking about how it's spread, and it's almost like it forms a symbiotic relationship with us. Like it's trying to be with us if you give it sort of like, I don't know, some type of brain, right? Like the COVID virus mutates so that it can live longer in our bodies, instead of just killing us outright, right? Like it's like, oh, we're really, really strong, and when they die, I guess I die. So why don't I just learn to live longer and soften the blow, for example, but continue to grow in community? I think that's a strange behavior. Like it seems like it has. I mean, I guess evolutionarily, it's given sort of coding, but that coding feels. I want to say like arcane in some way, or I don't know. It just feels. It's fascinating. Let's stop there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also like plagues are so commonly, throughout history associated with gods because they are so hard to comprehend. I mean, like to this day, I think it's still hard to really comprehend like what's happening with a lot of diseases, especially newer ones. It's something that's always like one step ahead of like rationality. It's like we can't really control it. We can't really isolate it. And then Also, I wanted to, shout out the like, tulips require viruses to sort of manifest different shapes and like phenotypes, and there's also like viruses are kind of foundational to the building of life too. Like they're necessary for the cycle of life, and then also there is also something to be said about what was I going to say? Oh, like this sort of speculative world of like designer viruses, of viruses that actually help you. I'm thinking about like Ozempic isn't a virus, but it's like, what if you had a virus that did a similar thing to Ozempic, right? And then there's like, I wanted to also mention in this context the movie Antiviral by Brandon Cronenberg, David Cronenberg's son. But yeah, it's crazy. It's like, it's in a speculative future where this guy works for a company that does make designer viruses, and the idea is that like a celebrity might have a version of like herpes. It's like a designer version of herpes that only she has, but then you can buy that virus so that you can have the same thing as she has. And that's a really interesting concept to think about. It's sort of, again, like kind of changing the idea of like being infected on its head a little bit. Yeah, so it's like, uh, um, yeah, I think just it's like fun to play with virality in the first place. I think there's something about this collectivity too, and this sort of like being with a tribe in a new way.
Yeah, I mean, going back to Nurgle a little bit, like in one of the videos that I saw, or that the audio for it is just kind of images, but it was talking about how, I don't know, this guy, he has to kill his whole ship so that they can see the like joy of Nurgle, and now he's suddenly like becoming a part of something greater, and like the grandfather, and they all chant like Nurgle, 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 or whatever. And I brought that up to say that like having a virus be like a way, like a form of kinship is really interesting, right? Like even people commiserating off of like, oh, I had this illness. Like I'm thinking about at work when people talk about their COVID symptoms, for example, they're like, oh my gosh, like I had a headache, I couldn't really do anything, and I had my muscle aches, and forming some sort of like I don't know, bond with people, or like I guess attempted bond in a virtual space with people over a shared experience. That I don't know. That was just a point of interest that you brought up for me when you were saying like, oh, in this Cronenberg movie, you would want to have a disease, like it's almost parasocial. Like, oh, I want to have
Yeah.
like Paris Hilton's, herpes or whatever, because that makes me closer to her in some way.
Yeah.
There's actually it's really funny. In the fantasy setting of the Warhammer universe, we were talking about skaven before,
Yeah.
which are these
Well, right. So I just wanted. So like,
ratmen.
there's the fantasy. So basically, like Warhammer, there's like three different properties: 30K, 40K, which are both space, and then there's Age of Sigmar, which is fantasy, like Middle Earth style.
Well,
Right?
actually, in
Am I
like
wrong?
that style, there's actually 4 games,
Oh god.
but 30K and 40K are same universe, and then there's Warhammer Fantasy, and then if you're following lore, which there was a whole errata nonsense going on with that, but essentially the world of Warhammer Fantasy in lore exploded, and the new setting is this one called Age of Sigmar. So there's like Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar, like technically the same universe, and then 30K and 40K are like the same universe.
Right. But yeah, so just one thing that's really interesting about the Chaos Gods is that they exist in both Age of Sigmar, the fantasy world, and 40K, the space world. So it kind of raises
Yeah.
all these questions about like, yeah, these interdimensional beings.
The exact same 4, and there's a lot of theories. My favorite being that there's a human god in fantasy called Sigmar, and he came out of nowhere. He just appeared, and suddenly godlike powers. And there just happens to be 2 Primarchs that were expunged from 40k history.
That's crazy.
So there's a massive theory that one of the missing Primarchs is Sigmar, which I always thought was a fun connecting their universes.
I love that. But okay, I would cut you off. You were going to mention something about the Skaven.
Yeah, so they have their own god, which, if following Age of Sigmar canon, has actually become the 5th Chaos God, the Great Horned Rat. But that's, again, speculative upon which canon you want to believe in. But the Great Horned Rat is really interesting because it's all these aspects of, like, I guess rats is
Because
what they're trying to focus on.
Skaven are rat folk, just for the listener.
They're mutant rat men. And they basically are exactly that. But one of the 4 factions of Skaven specifically focuses on plague without worshipping Nurgle. It's more about how rats spread plague than it is about the plagues themselves.
Shout out Clan Pestilence.
Clan Pestilence, exactly like you're saying, the designer diseases. The hierarchy of Clan Pestilence, the more diseases and plagues you are able to survive and live with, that's how you get higher status in Clan Pestilence. Yeah, like their highest guy, Lord Skrulk, has the funniest story where he met the grand leader of Clan Pestilence, and apparently just the sight of how gruesome the Lord looked with all of these plagues and illnesses affected him, Skrulk tore out his own eyes just to not look at him anymore.
That's fucking crazy. It's like, oh my god, this the true image of horror. I'm currently trying to look up Clan Pestilence, but that's insane. Like that. So they don't worship Nurgle, but they're almost offshoots of I guess Nurgle. It seemed to me that they would benefit from teaming up with Nurgle to some extent, but maybe the allied. Suffering. Oh, they have allied. Okay, cool.
In lore, the Skaven have allied with Chaos forces.
Okay,
but it's also Nurgle. Yeah, it's these rats in many ways are maybe kind of relevant also to more things to shout out here, which would be the Nazi mad scientists Mengele and
Unit 731 in Japan.
Who were researching using biological weapons, and again, that sort of fascination that is latent in the human spirit somewhere, this fascination with torturous applications of disease. And then also how moments of colonialism are kind of this hierarchy of who is the most infected, in a contact between groups of people that have been separated for years, hundreds of years, centuries. The interaction of the viruses is a big part of the colonial moment. And just kind of fucking crazy to think about those moments and how the fact that certain people had certain combinations of viruses, was such a big part of those moments as well. Just wanted to bring some. I just love ending these episodes on the most dark, the kind of most downer notes possible. But but I love Skaven so much because I played in the video game, I was playing Clan Pestilence in Warhammer 2, the Total War game, and it was so fun, because you can sneak under people's settlements and on the battlefield you're throwing these pots of of pox and stuff, and it just is fun to just again those it just is so fun to play that. I don't know.
Maybe one thing that's kind of been I've been thinking about with all of this is curing these diseases, or when you think about viruses, part the way you can't expunge the virus, you just get used to it, right? Am I understanding that correctly about our immune system?
Oh, in real life?
Yeah, in real life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another thing is like, you need to be uh, you need to go through viruses to build up your immune system. So that's why they're like vital to, being a like rigorous individual organism that's going to like continue to exist.
Right, right. I mean, yeah, I guess what I was thinking about with this is that like the relationship between chaos and order in the Warhammer universe feels like it is they're inextricably linked, and it causes like all of this strife. But with Nurgle, there is joy in this strife to some extent. But as we sort of apply these concepts to real life, that like we are sort of in the ecosystem, like being connected to everything. Part of that is like finding harmony with the things that harm us, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's like it's a very interesting. I don't know. It's like I don't know if there's like a type of way, like philosophy that's sort of like, oh yeah, like you know maybe it's Zen, but I can kind of get elements of stoicism in there where like everything
Hmm.
is kind of on like an equal playing field. But more so that maybe this conflict is what the universe is, to some extent, and that we become more a part of life by letting living things live in us, if that makes sense. I don't know where I'm going with that necessarily, but these are just ideas that this topic has brought up for me, because there's no cure,
Yeah.
right? Like it is, you don't cure the illness, you just live with it, or you be like, maybe even folks with chronic illnesses, right? Like not only do they learn to live with it, but there's sort of a lesson that they glean, or like a new life that they must develop inherently after acquiring it. I don't know.
This also had me thinking. I'm remembering now. Like this week when I was like thinking about these concepts, I was thinking about this idea. Excuse me. Like Carson has talked about this guy as well, but there's this guy we listen to. Contain is the podcast, but like he used to be on about this idea that like he called it like BBQ, and it just is the idea that he would talk about this idea, and it's not just him who came up with it, but it's like this idea that like we're all swine in this fucking like world, and all I'm trying to do is drown you in barbecue sauce. Like all that matters is that you just slurp down that barbecue sauce. The idea being that like we're all in this infected pit together. So like let's just like have a good time while we're at it. And he's moved on from that philosophy since, I believe. Like I'm conjecture, but it seems that way. But to me, that there's something interesting about that when you think about like perhaps like even like the traumas of living in this world. Just I think that so often I think of like so many things that I do on a daily basis are toxic, right? Like by necessity, I drive a car, for example. I eat a bunch of shit, that's actually bad for me or whatever, right? And then I also, I'm sure emotionally, like, also like carry on a lot of toxic traits, let alone all the extractions that our economy necessitate in order for me to live this like life to begin with. On and on. There's so many things you can look at in any direction that are toxic. So it's like, do you try to like rid yourself of that over and over again? Like, do you go as ascetic as possible? It's definitely an approach, but like, you're always going to be impure. So for me, there's a little bit of this like acceptance of like, okay, so we're in a toxic world and we're spreading toxins. That's something that is like one antidote for me, ironically, but it does kind of bring those questions like, if you really bring it to like the real world, like, is there something there or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I think one thing that I think about in terms of like, oh, if you go ascetic, if you find a cottage in the mountains and like live off the land and all of this other stuff, like you somehow do that, um, you aren't outside. Like you may just not be. You're kind of giving this approach of like out of sight, out of mind, because the pestilence and like industry will always eventually reach you, right? Like there's no true escape from the poisons and the toxins, and there's no pure detoxification. And I don't know, like even when I think of it in some ways like the digestive tract, right? Like, you're gleaning what you can and then you create waste, but then like there's still shit on your ass. You know what I mean? Like the waste is part of you in some way. And yeah, I think it's helpful to maybe think about like living with your vices and or your own toxicity. um Maybe it's not living with or just managing it so that you live in some sort of equilibrium in the virus soup of some sort. But
I mean, yeah, one more thing I was thinking about just was like, if you're in like, if you're working this like crazy, if we're working like, a bunch of hours every week, you're really in the grind, then sometimes being sick is like literally your ticket to like rest. You know what I mean? To like have a second by yourself. It's so funny that like in this world also like with our medical industrial complex, we like value sickness and health in such a weird fucking ways. But like having a cold is like truly like, oh hell yeah, like I can take like 2 days off and get paid for it.
yeah, that's true. And also, I was even thinking about how, like, if you're in high stress environments, like those, I guess, is it, I don't know, your stress hormones keep you from exhibiting those, like, experience or those symptoms of illness. But then as soon as you get like a vacation day, suddenly you're like sick as a dog and you're like on the couch, like recovering because your body's just like trying to keep you going. And then finally your body says, all right, viruses, time to make this motherfucker rest.
Yeah.
you know
Well, it's one of those. It's like is the symptom. Maybe sometimes the symptom is the cure, as opposed to like the illness is underlying it, and then the symptom is what you need to sit with in order to like actually heal. So it's like I feel like these conversations with Nurgle that we actually can productively have. I think that there's because I like to think about the Warhammer universe just like mythology and history, where like it's written by a certain type of person, and it's like obviously a embellished version of these things. And I think that like chaos is always given a bad rap, for most of the times that we see it. Like I think that we can have like a negotiated discussion with these deities, perhaps. If we want to personify them in the figures of Slaanesh, Tzeentch, Khorne, and Nurgle, then you can do that, and you can have a more negotiated like exchange with them than is depicted in the games, because the games have to make it as extreme as possible. But like, yeah, like I think that there is something about accepting the ailments that you have that might actually enable you to see them as somewhat of a gift. Like it's again not a very like politically correct thing to say, because like, and again, I'm not diminishing the fact that like chronic illness is like horrible, especially in this world. But I mean, like, yeah, there's like little maybe parts of it that you can see as as maybe you can bring some of that like acceptance of it and sort of almost enjoyment of it in somehow. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I feel like if you don't do some part of that, you're just living in denial to some extent, right? Like you're not quite allowing yourself to like fully understand your lived experience,
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that a lot in like terms of things like I've always been, and I think that might have been a draw to Nurgle for me as well. As I've always been drawn to like finding beauty or usefulness in things that are negative. Like for example, like I have this conversation a lot with my friends with listening to like very discordant noise music or things of that nature, but I find it almost as a healing tool a lot of the time, where it is like supposedly these violent things, but I find a way to make peace out of them. And I think that's like why those smiles that you always see on Nurgle kind of always like got me, because that's someone who's just completely conquered turning their negatives into a positive, and they no longer have fear of any of that. They can just gleefully exist. It kind of goes back. There's a specific type of demon called the Beast of Nurgle, which I always thought was such a funny concept. And it kind of reminded me when you were saying they kind of, viruses want to be with us. These massive creatures that are just covered in a disease that will just immediately kill you when it gets close, but it has the mind of a Labrador. So it sees people and it's like, oh my god, people, I want to jump and lick and play and have fun. And it doesn't know that the minute it touches them, the creature's just going to rot to filth. And it's this crazy thing of where it's this joyous, happy creature just creating just rot and decay. And from that rot and decay, of course, rises his new friends when demons rise up from the corpses of these rotted corpses.
I love that. The Beast of Nurgle.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's a good image to kind of leave the episode on, unless there's something else that anyone wanted to mention.
Oh, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been really nice. It's always so nice talking to you. Like, honestly,
Yeah.
at work, like being on break, talking about this stuff helps get through the day quite a bit. And I'd love to discuss more lore with you at some point.
Yeah, 100%. Just let me know.
Sounds good. Also, I mean, there is this manifesto to get to as well. It's always a part of the podcast that we have to kind of perseverate on a little bit. But is there anything that you want to plug, Tyler? Any like albums you've been listening to, or I don't know, any like RPGs or whatever?
Shout out to the new Frost Children song featuring Danny Brown.
Oh, fuck yeah.
That song was amazing.
Yeah.
I've been having that on repeat.
It's pretty sick.
Other than that, no. I'm just kind of working. Come check out Fiorella Pasta at the Durango in Vegas. We just opened up. We're not even a year yet, so come visit, get some really dope-ass handmade pasta.
We've been talking about having a Mutant Manifesto gourmand episode. So yeah, potentially, it'd be fun to I don't know, see if we could somehow, just one of these days we'll all meet up and have a wonderful meal together.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'll just say, follow us on Instagram if you don't. There's also a YouTube. If you're on Spotify, if you just go to the app on your phone and rate us 5 stars and follow us there. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Oh wait. Also, if you all play video games, please, join the Discord and maybe we'll play some games together. That'd be really fun.
Yeah, I would definitely like to do some more gaming. Yeah. We could definitely get some teams going, for different things, or just play some RPGs or whatever.
Getting some Darktide, and you can really experience what it's like being an Imperium soldier with a Nurgle outbreak.
Oh, we should play that. Yeah.
You're fighting Nurgle specifically.
Fuck yeah.
Has infected a hive world, and you as prison soldiers have to fight back the
Classic.
Nurgle outbreak.
That'd be fun. We should play. That'd be great.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Hell yeah.
Cool.
Become. No one, not two, in sky and seeds sown. Dream up shadows to love through and hold their calloused hands. Shape change in the nether pool from breath to breath. As your mind is freed, your ass will follow. Then arise anew again and again. How do you look? How's that feel? to rot with glee, to Nurgle, praise be.
About your placement, but you're simply overrated by the simple vacant-minded who are swindled by your greatness. Get addicted to the fragrance, start adapting to your haters. I will light out with a fall and think it's time to make some changes. You motherfucker, you a bloodsucker, collecting septic in the trenches till you're one of us. You motherfucker, you a bloodsucker, collecting septic in the trenches till you're one of us.